the President of the FICCI, Mr. Mariwala, the incoming President, Mr. Kanoria, Dr. Rajiv Kumar, Nainalal, leaders of the industry, ladies and gentlemen. Let me at the very outset express my gratitude to the FICCI for having invited me for this luncheon address at the annual general meeting. This annual general meeting is being held at a very crucial junction. And therefore, Mr. Kanoria's opening comments, I think, are both appropriate and understandable. In the opening comments, I did find, not between the lines, but almost directly, a message being conveyed, which I am sure the leaders of the industry present here are all concerned with. The theme of your annual general meeting is Empowering India. And what he did mention has a direct bearing on the issue of concern as far as you are concerned. I've always felt that there are many occasions in history, in the life of a nation, where at a crucial juncture, politics has to interact with history. The two meet each other. And that's when those in the political activity have to take a call as to whether the issues of national concern occupy the prime space as far as the decision making is concerned, and the call of duty to your nation takes the front seat, and therefore areas of political disagreement could at that moment of time be temporarily overlooked. These occasions are seen whenever we find the country being pushed into a challenging situation, if not a crisis situation. And I do feel that the key area with which you are concerned, that's the management of India's economy, one such challenging moment does exist today. In the last 2 decades, probably the difference between your earlier AGMs and today's AGM is that there was always an air of optimism about what's happening in the country. Even when in 1991, when we decided to open out, there was a grave crisis. Subsequently, we went through the East Asian crisis, we went through the subprime, the global slowdown. The ability of India to react to those situations and counter those situations was never in doubt. Nobody in the media or in a public discourse ever use a phrase that instead of reacting and fighting those challenges, India was being pushed into a situation of a policy paralysis. And today there is a broader consensus that such a situation has arisen. Now, one of the greatest strengths of India, which we've always believed, is that sense of resilience. We get into a crisis, we emerge out of the crisis, we emerge stronger. And that's how this country of great divergences has remained together. Today, I think there is a need to crack this larger mood of pessimism which exists. And probably I take it in the right spirit, the observation of Mr. Kanoria, that there is a need for a larger consensus. I don't think India's problem today is essentially because of facts which we routinely mention. There's an impact of a global slowdown, the oil prices are high, the inflation rates are high, I think these are situations which have arisen frequently in the past. And India has always known a route, a roadmap, how to react to those situations. And I do feel today the problem in which you seek to take the country out, and I'll respond to the query that you made by mentioning that our first and initial problem in tackling this situation is not purely an economic problem, it's a political problem. For any government which has the prime responsibility in policy formulation, I think there are three essentials which are required. The first essential is the leadership and the quality of leadership. Leadership is never the art of evading or avoiding decisions. The leadership is not the art of indefinitely waiting for a consensus. It's the art of leading the way and forcing those decisions. The second essential which is required is the credibility of those who take those decisions. And the third, any regime must even have an aura about it. For want of a better word, I used in Parliament a phrase insisting that a government of the day must be one which has, as we call it in Hindi, the saakh. Sarkar ki saakh honi chahiye, sarkar ka ek ikbal hona chahiye. And when you find that Iqbal is lacking, when that leadership is lacking, the credibility dips, that's when the mood of pessimism sets in. And therefore, to get this situation out, I think the message which you have conveyed to me is a very appropriate message. But I think you also need to convey a very large message to the government. And that large message to the government is that it's about time that before we are pushed into a greater crisis, the government must start realizing that this is a serious problem. And I think the essence of this problem started because the governance model which was being followed by the present government, I think there is something unnatural about that model. When I say that there is something unnatural about the model, initially in UPA 1, the model of parallel power centers, it was being rationalized as a model where somebody else takes the political decisions, somebody executes the decisions. Now, you are all leaders of the industry. It's a very appropriate corporate model that the board takes a decision, a professional CEO implements the mandate of the board. But the world's largest democracy doesn't run on that pattern. The Prime Minister and the government are the most accountable institutions. And therefore, they must wield political authority. And in order to wield political authority, you can't have a government which is in office but really not in power. The problem has become graver in UPA 2 because the two power centers even ideologically don't seem to be on the same page. Now, it is this factor which you now seek to correct. And once you seek to correct this factor, I don't think you'll have to ask us, why don't you cooperate with a government which is itself indecisive? And I can give you umpteen areas. There is no parliamentary system where opposition announces the policy. There is no parliamentary system where opposition introduces legislations. The system is the government takes an initiative, a government starts building a consensus. But if you have a crisis situation within a government, that even on policy domain, people are on different pages, you'll always have situations of this kind emerging. I don't think there is a serious doubt about the kind of economic model that we need to pursue. In 1991, we set upon a particular course. This country benefited hugely from that course. And at least for the next 15 odd years, we pursued that course. Today, irrespective of differences on minor issues, we are now moving towards a larger consensus in terms of the model that we conceive, at least the mainstream parties are, where you need to increase economic activity, where you need to increase growth rates, where you need to have an economy which generates employment, which generates larger revenues for the state, where you need better infrastructure, and an enriched government, instead of merely relying upon the trickling down effect to help the weaker sections, then uses this larger revenue for various poverty alleviation schemes. You may call it the food for work, you may call it Narrega or Manrega, but these are different concepts. But within that model, you have been broadly pursuing this model itself. You need to get into the next stage. Expanding infrastructure, making sure how you can implement further reforms in order to make India into a low-cost manufacturing hub. Now, these are all items. That's all right. Thanks. These are all issues which existed on the drawing board and which could be a possible roadmap for the kind of progress you need to make. Now, how do you need to do that if you're in government? I think the first essential if you're in government is you must have the ruling party accept this as a principle and put this on a priority. Vote gathering is an important aspect of democracy. Nobody wants to commit political harakiri by saying, I'll take unpopular measures. So we concede to the government the right, or the ruling party the right to enhance its own vote capacities. But in the process, if the bill because of that is going to increase, then you can't say that this year we may fall below 7.5% or 7% and move towards 6%. The kind of bills which you have to raise, then you have to think that in terms of economic activity that you generate, you have to look then beyond 9 and 10%. These are bills which can be appropriately paid only if you have a 10-11% growth rate. And therefore, not to concentrate on this aspect, but only to concentrate on the factum of how do you get votes. Let me deviate a little into politics. I looked after 3 elections, 2 in 2005 and 1 in 2010 in Bihar. The high point was the agenda changed. And when the agenda changed, suddenly the agenda became aspirational and developmental in Bihar. And that did work. I thought this was about to happen in UP. Because people were speaking in terms of corruption, development, various other governance issues. And suddenly somebody came and decided to abandon governance issues and said, I will now bring a divisive issue. The moment the divisive issue came, governance went into the background. Therefore, the government of the day has to decide that in terms of its own developmental agendas, how its roadmap is clear, it needs to generate those kind of growth rates. And therefore, besides this capacity and these maneuvers of increasing your votes, you need the country and the economy to move on to a faster pace. You then need to make sure that your alliance is in place and your alliance is ready to support and not prevent. And here I find we've had coalition governments. The track record of a coalition government in which the communist parties also participated, the United Front government, was not so bad. They moved slowly, but they moved surely in the right direction. We led a huge unwieldy coalition which had 24 partners. There were delays at times, but one after one, the steps were all directed in the same direction. At the end of the day, economic reforms is an art of the possible. It's not a one-day surgical operation. And to achieve that art of the possible, it's the responsibility of the government of the day to navigate the ship and slowly move step by step in a particular direction. You can't, for that purpose, when you put your government in place, your ruling party, your coalition in place, you can't have a government where the ministers are either, I'm sorry to use those phrases, either too arrogant or sulking. That's the last you need to bring a broader consensus. You can't have a leadership which lives under an impression of an injured martyrdom. I wanted to achieve, I am being prevented from achieving. And once you are able to overcome this situation, my response, Mr. Kanoria, is it's the prime initiative of the government to start consensus building with the opposition. We need not speak to the opposition. We'll speak to the opposition through the media. If that's the approach, then consensus building itself becomes difficult. I think you put the right question to me, but that should have been your second question. Your first question should have been in the opening session today, where you should have told the government, why are you indecisive? But if you told the government, why are you indecisive, today I find a strange situation. There are open letters being written to the opposition. Please cooperate with the government which is not taking decisions. So I can quite understand you write letters to the government, they accept your suggestions, and then you come to us and hold us by the collar and say, why are you being an obstructionist? My personal experience of the last two sessions was somewhat disappointing. I need not get into the details. You've laid down the agenda, the pension bill. We suggested some changes. The LIC law, the government discussed with her, and that was a good model of consensus. The finance minister, I give him credit for having built that consensus. We suggested a change, he accepted it, we cooperated in passing it. Cooperatives. He came for the pension bill. We worked out an arrangement. It was to be introduced the next day. We cut a sorry figure by announcing to the media that with these changes we are supporting the bill. Only to be informed by the media that the government has now gone back and they said we are not bringing the bill. And suddenly I find in the chambers of commerce in meeting after meeting saying, why are you not cooperating with them? It not only happened in the winter session, it happened with 3 legislations, I can tell you, though that was not a publicly discussed issue, in the monsoon session itself. Therefore, before the opposition comes into place, the government must have its consensus in place. The government must then speak to the opposition, and I do completely support the spirit of your suggestion that if you are to look at 10% and 11%, because that's the kind of growth rate which can foot the bill for the kind of expenditures that you have in mind. And assuming it's the government's prerogative to initiate those expenditures, whether they are affordable or not affordable, in that event, you need a larger support base. There is a need for consensus. The economic model which we have adopted is a model of consensus. There is not a great dispute with regard to that. There are enough areas on which we can start politicking. And I think what's extremely important, as a part of consensus building, big nations are built by big-hearted people. And therefore, the government of the day must realize that it has to be big-hearted. I've always given illustrations. I said so in Parliament, when the finance minister said we need an environment of cooperative federalism. Of course we do. But cooperative federalism is not merely that you help me in passing the GST, which is going to be of some great help. Then when a state government comes and says, well, look at me in Uttar Pradesh, take this small example. If UP was a separate nation, it would be the 6th largest nation in the world. They are crying for an international airport. Can somebody answer why is it not being given, irrespective whether we like the government there in power or not? Why should the Chief Minister of Orissa have to confront a situation where the centre tries to put a spoke almost in every project that a state takes? Have you ever realized that even when national highways, I am not referring to a larger issue that in the selection of personnel on success stories like telecom and highways, You should have been careful enough that these were our role model areas of success of the liberalization process. You could not pursue a policy and put men there who converted success stories into scandals. And therefore, when you design national highways, don't decide to bypass a state merely because it's ruled by some other party. How many governors in non-Congress states have held up legislations? Now, these are all factors which are factors of real politics which impinge on this cooperative federalism. So the answer to your larger query is, we of course do need a consensus. The model is of consensus. The road to that model may have several steps. Most of them are steps of consensus. There would be some areas on which you are entitled to a different opinion. But to enforce that, you need leadership, you need credibility, you need authority, you need cohesive thinking within the government, within the alliance, and then you need consensus building with the center, with the opposition parties at the center, and you need to espouse confidence of the states. These are not surgical acts, as I said, these are an art of the possible. You can't have the states losing confidence in the sense of fairness of the center, and then say, cooperate with me in this reform. It is this which is being held up. And therefore, if we really want to empower India, I think I go back to what I had said in the middle. India, in order to become a great nation, will have to be governed by big-hearted men. And once we get those big hearts, I think the consensus which you have indicated to me would be only a matter of course. Thank you very much.